Good evening, protest followers. This is not a protest. But it's been a week since my last broadcast, and I thought I'd sit down and have a bit of a live chat with you. Talk through what's been happening this week, some of the questions and answers I've had in my comments, and see what's happening there. Thought, why not on a most of us locked down Friday evening at 9 o'clock? Share with you a little bit of the world as I see it. Care to join me? First of the questions that I get most commonly: why do I do what I do? Why do I go out there week after week, month after month, just on a year now? Why do I get beaten up, smashed up, yelled at, insulted, arrested? Well, I haven't been arrested yet, but detained time after time. I want to tell you about one of the first things that changed me, radicalized me, turned me into an extremist. Share with you a story. Stories matter. They certainly do to me. And how I came to this tonight was I was reading my responsibilities. This is from the International Federation of Journalists. It's the Code of Conduct for Journalists. It's an important one because how I got here is I felt that others weren't holding up to this set of responsibilities. And someone, even if they mightn't have years of experience, a journalistic university degree, or millions of dollars in funding, should have a crack at it. What's the worst could happen? Number 1, respect for truth and for the right of the public to truth is the first duty of the journalist. Let me tell you about a year ago now, when I was at a student protest. Oh, that's a long time ago. There I am trying to keep my heart rate low through Victoria Park, the very same park where we saw a riot take over. Let's go back 5 seconds because that horn matters. I'm going to freeze frame here and I'm going to share with you this van that you can see here. There's a student protest which had been described as police brutality, but this gentleman here is driving into a set of students that have taken over the Princess Highway and blockaded it. Not that different from what we saw last week. SBS, NITV, student journalists are all here to cover it. And I'm there saying to wrong shoes to one of the NITV reporters, I always try and keep kind and friendly with everyone I can, except those who beat me. And just up here is when this gentleman comes to a stop because he's been honking at some of the other drivers, some of the other protesters, because he's just trying to get where he's going. I think that was Aman Kapoor, one of the student journalists there. I'm trying to keep... And this is when the road's blockaded. Now, this wasn't allowed, or gatherings of more than 20 at the time were not permitted. By and large, this was judged later to be, especially by the number of arrests, another illegal protest. I bring this up because how this was written about later on changed me. Natasha Chrysanthemous wrote about what happened in September 2020, and she described it as police brutality in the park. Brett Wyman, one of the Fairfax journalists, was there to try and explain some of it through the power, or one of the most powerful tools that there is, which is the photograph. Somehow, he missed the most powerful shot of all, which was a blockade of the road. This private driver is being shouted at, about to be shouted at by police.
Crazy, isn't it, mate? I know! Get a job, you useless! Oh no! I'm sorry, mate!
Now, did you hear that dunk dunk? I want to share that with you. I'll turn this up a little bit and see if you can hear the dunk dunk.
Crazy, isn't it, mate? I know! Get a Oh no, I'm sorry, mate.
That was the side door panels of this driver's door, a van, being knocked and kicked in. The students were completely unhappy with this driver disturbing their protest and threatening, driving his car in a potentially threatening manner. In the middle of BLM, people were concerned. No mention of this happened in the Sydney Morning Herald. Not a word. I was staggered. I was absolutely staggered that in no part of this article had any occupation of the road been mentioned. They illustrated students sitting down in a park that were allowed to stay, and those protesting were fined. They described it as a questionable amount of crowd management protocols, and it shocked me. Because what I saw with my own eyes was a protest, a road occupation. This happens. And here comes the blockade here. And the purpose of this protest is to get attention for what they're willing to do. They have demonstrated here that they are willing to break laws, have an unpermitted protest. Yes, this happens during COVID when you can't gather more than 20, and demonstrate that now is the time to protest for their cause in order to gain attention to it. And the first duty, the respect for truth and the right of the public to the truth, to be the first duty of the journalist. International Federation of Journalists. It's not there. I read the Sydney Morning Herald every day as a piece of gospel truth for decades. I'm now 37. Probably the first time I started reading it particularly religiously was back when I was 15 or 16. You'd sit on the train and you'd see these gentlemen with these huge broadsheets, and they'd fold and unfold them, and they'd pocket them down so they read just that one article, and then they'd unfold it again to get to page 14 when the stocks, and fold it back down again to see what Peter Harcher had to say, and unfold it and get back to Russ Gittins. Like the New York Times, I looked at these mature gentlemen and saw that they held something of truth, of power. That knowledge was something that I didn't have access to, because who can afford the $60 a month when you're a young fella? They had access that I couldn't. That changed when articles like this are being written, and I know why it's happening. I know why we do it, why we have to. Let me have a look at a few comments before I keep going. Wendy Grant, how old are you? 37. I don't want to burst your bubble with a fact here. Have to. Facts matter. Hey Loopy Loo, biggest fan. Thank you. I'm telling a story about why I do what I do. It doesn't earn me any money. It costs me a lot of money and time. I don't mind that. It's not a regret there, but I'm here to explain to the people who are here on a Friday night trying to understand why the world is what it is. And this was an important moment.
Yep.
This was an important moment that changed me.
I'm sorry, mate. It's not me.
All the big cameras are there, and they don't mention a bit of this moment. He's not happy because he's had the side of his door banged in by a couple of student protesters. Fairly so. I don't know whether it was permanently damaged or not, but if your car's getting kicked, you're getting angry. And I think that kind of truth matters, whether you're on their side or another. And that's why when we look into the writer of this one, Natasha Chrysanthemous, we wonder, why is it that she's writing in such a specific way? Why is this education reporter forgotten to mention it? Because as a former editor of the Student Activist magazine on SOE, there's a certain interest and reason why. While she works for Fairfax now, she was a writer for the Student Activist magazine then. the very same group that organised this kind of protest. And when I saw that, my heart sank into my stomach. I was appalled. I was shocked. Journalists skew truth. I know you don't want to believe this, but hopefully many of the people who are watching here have accepted that much of the corporate media no longer tells what they can see for their own eyes not to be the truth all of the time. And that is just the reality of where we are. But how far, how much that is skewed to suit a certain narrative, this was too far for me. This was just way too far for me. And that's when I knew I had to go to every protest I could. That's when I knew I had to show more of this. And the protests I started going to, they weren't always comfortable or easy. At this trans rights protest outside Downing Street, we can see the lady in the gold sunglasses speaking to the lady charging on the left-hand side, one Honey Christensen, and her associate Arshad Prasad. I'd been standing there for about 20 minutes, honestly silently. This was one of the most ordinary protests I've been to, but just watch, see what happens. What happens next, I didn't expect. They charge the distance outside a court and throw me to the ground twice. You're probably wondering what happened. Thankfully, there's a 360-degree camera on my back because I'd had run-ins before and been unable to share people with what happened.
Get the fuck out! Get the fuck out!
See the gentleman's face? It's a very basic want we have. Some would call it a need for violence, a need for power, a passion for a cause. You can use anything you want out of this. But what I see on this gentleman's face is pleasure. This is a joy. This is euphoric. Reasons why we can dive into. We can talk about the issues of the transgender rights movements, the ability of social left activists to enforce violence in the streets without consequence. Whatever it is, something beyond that. Spin doctors. Yeah, they are. Aaron Nash, love your work. Thank you. Love from Melbourne. Hi, Jenny. Thanks for the comment. The spin doctors, yeah, the people who try and shape the truth of what happens at these protests. These protests shift public opinion. They are very important in moving the needle of votes to one angle. Or you wouldn't see so many politicians show up at them. Whether it's social right or social left is not the point. These protests move people's opinions. They matter. They are plausibly as important as any opinion poll, because from it people look at what people are willing to put their asses on the line for. The crowd chants to me, "Fascist scum off our streets," after two of their associates had charged me in order to break my expensive camera. Well, I call it expensive. Anything over $1,000 is particularly expensive. Lens and body. Selfie stick. Screen ended up needing yet another replacement. Gets quite common. But the two gentlemen to the right, the sheriffs, what are they doing? Nothing.
You want to do something about that, guys?
When I ask them if they're going to do anything about it, they point after a time that not only can they don't really understand what just happened or how could this be anything bad, but after about a minute, they eventually try and communicate There's not much that they can do. You'll need to speak to someone else about it, because what are they to do? Amanda Starr, did you know Brady got arrested? Yes. I saw some of the news reports, and I'm sure it is. Charged and released, no social media condition as of last Saturday. I'm surprised it was as gentle as no social media condition. An organizer under as much attention as he is could be electronics limited. So that's in a situation, as I believe this has happened to some of the other organisers, where their electronics have been taken away, and they may be told that they cannot use any electronic communication devices, so just dumb phones. Do I think it's right or wrong? That's not the point. It happens. This is what law enforcement does. Is it justified? That's a whole other question that I want to come to later on. If you're here to try and understand what we're navigating, I'm going to take you on a bit more of a journey. So we're talking now about a social left protest, which we can see here in front of us, and then talking about Brady, a social right protest. Now you might think, oh, left, right, divide, what is it? Well, I'm not picking the left and right because Patrick Gibson, one of the BLM organisers, can do that for us. He's been disappointed that the police are using the lockdown powers to harass Lizzie Jarrett, who's potentially organising a BLM rally. Certainly after seeing the Freedom Riot a couple of weeks ago, I can tell you quite a few BLM organisers are wishing they could do the same thing. It's the same flaunting of the rules that we saw when BLM went ahead a year ago with some 10 or 20,000, maybe more, if depending on the look at it, marched through the city. And a lot of other social right activists said, hey, why can't we protest and do the same thing? That's what they said when the Freedom Riot happened a couple of weeks ago. And whether you look at it from one way or the other, this tit for tat goes, if they can protest, why can't we? And that's right, having some rules about how much you can, what you can do, they either need to be followed quite clearly. Who gets to protest, how and when? All of a sudden, if a protest needs to be legal, people start asking, well, as we saw with Daniel Andrews calling any protest against him illegal, they go, well, but why? But when? What about me? And that's what we're seeing here with Patrick Gibson saying that Lizzie seems to be feeling she's being harassed at home. Police can visit you at home and have a chat with you as much as they want. So they could visit you day after day after day. And hopefully they will choose some fair hours to do so, but they can also pick terrible times. And until you challenge it, there's not a lot that can be done there. They're not charging you, they're not arresting you. They can stop by and just say, hey, have you heard of any BLM rallies coming up? No, okay, that's fine. And for a lot of people that will be confronting, like Lizzie. Why isn't Paddy the go-to for that group? Yes, he is. But Paddy works for the UTS Ngurra Institute, and how can I best put this? He's better equipped to handle these kind of challenges. So it would not help the cause if you're trying to reduce protest activity in the middle of a pandemic, which is government policy at the moment. Now, I wanted to bring up this left-right social divide because I would suggest to you from what I've seen, and now I'm giving you an opinion of mine, I don't think the police are targeting any particular group right now. A while ago, it may have been a little bit different. Certainly, I would suggest that these social left activists, police could not see them as a threat. There's something that comes down like a shield, a black line that can't see a social left activist as a threat. It just doesn't make sense. Wearing a dress and chatting like it can't be a danger. We're talking about BLM because I don't think it's just freedom protests, it's just BLM, it's just Trump rallies that are getting crushed down. I think it's a broad opinion. And continuing about law enforcement, I want to bring up something quite important that we don't know enough about, and that is these Peelian principles. So all the way back when London's starting to become a metropolis, we're trying to work out how do we put 1.5 million people in one city together? How do we police them? How do we get them together? And then how do we all follow the same rules? Robert Peel came out with these 9 principles, which still are a big part of Anglosphere policing to this day. And in order, you're trying to prevent repression by military force. I know the army is out. I'm not going to get into that, but you're trying to reduce the need of a shotgun-armed military on the streets whose first job has always been trained to defeat enemy armies. The second is to try and recognize that the power of the police to fulfill their functions and duties is dependent upon public approval. As soon as you have a populace that no longer approves of how the police are enforcing order, you've got a problem bigger than crime, because now everyone's beginning to become a criminal. And if you've got a city of 5.5 million criminals, you've got a big problem. Now you might then think that the police enforcing some of these anti-protest activity does not have public approval. I think it does. I think Daniel Andrews' approval ratings in Victoria are a good example of this. Even though he disappeared for months, even though he's enforced his 6th lockdown, what have you, there is still just over a majority support for that. And that should be remarkable in a city that is seeing large economic declines, changes in employment, unemployment, business closures. If this were a similar economic recession we had to have, unlike Keating, his approval numbers would be in the toilet, but they're not. I'm suggesting to you that a lot of the public opinion around some of this policing still is true. And it is there. And why I'm bringing this up is any protest, as I see it from a journalist's point of view, is to try and shift public opinion. A lot of people will say it's to try and express your views and fight for your rights. All of this is true and important, but at the tippy top of all of this, a protest must be there to try and shift public opinion about your cause. And that can be for good or bad. I wanted to take you through that tonight. I know that's a bit of a journey, but I wanted to take you through a journey that has been sticking with me ever since the past weeks. My journey trying to listen to some of the BLM activists in the protest we saw last year, and how some of those protesters confronted me within moments. Let me try and mute this while I'm there. The subtitles will tell enough of a story. If you want your protest to succeed, unless people support your, not just protest cause, but protesting entirely, that's really difficult. Because as it is right now, right or wrong, people are very scared out there. People are terrified, not just of this virus, but of not fitting in. And that is even more dangerous than the virus itself right now for a lot of people, is not fitting in. Not laying a moral judgment on it, but in a search for some kind of community, one of the best and most important things people are looking for is to just fit in. And importantly, as we see here, to confront those who don't. Even if it's just quietly looking at your speech in a public park, someone who doesn't fit in is very, very dangerous. Is very, very risky to the group as a whole. Shifting that's hard. That's hard. And that's the purpose of a lot of these protests, is to try and communicate that. Thanks, Tracy. Glad to do what I do. Glad to share some of this with you. I'm going to keep going to protests. One of the biggest things that has been enlightening from the past couple of weeks, and over 500,000 people have seen some of my protest coverage over the past couple of weeks, has been to reach new people. That was a nice hit. Didn't you see that one? You want to see that one again? I felt that in my neck the next day. Gosh, it hurt. Had to go to hospital to get my neck checked out. I think it was my left side. I was just saying that one of the most amazing things in reaching 500,000 people with the last couple of protest streams, which is an incredible number, has been to meet passionate people who care about the truth, who care about the code of conduct coming out of the IFJ, who care about truth and are willing to spend the hard yards, the long hours to watch some of these streams themselves and determine, is it good or bad? Are the protesters right, or are the police cracking down on something fair? Should they really be out there? Just trying to navigate what it is that's happening. It's time consuming. It's costly. A long time ago, we had people we could trust to do that, but those newsrooms have been hollowed out. They're not there anymore. So it's up to you and us. And I don't mind if it's only a couple of hundred people. I don't mind if it's less than 100, just a few handfuls of people trying to discover what's happening out there. Because what, more importantly than the hundreds of thousands of people who just pass through for 15 or 60 seconds or what have you, is over the past week, some really passionate, really interested people have reached out to me. Cinematographers, video editors, and have reached out to me and say, hey, how can we make this even better? And what we're starting to put together is some ideas on how, with the next protest coming up on the 21st, I think it is, to do better than we ever have before, to cover what is happening more clearly, far better than some helicopter in the sky for 2 hours as 7 News does, then a 30-second on the ground, and now the protesters are violent. To dive even deeper than it and illustrate not just the tactical landscape, but the opinion and the real feelings, to really try and capture it, not with a partisan view. There are some partisan filmmakers, and that's great. So partisan filmmakers for the protest cause, fantastic. I just want to listen to what people have to say, support and against. That's what I love doing. Running down the sidewalk, people are just, oh gosh, what's happening? And then saying, what do you think, mate? And for people who say no, I want to hear why. Because if you're there to watch the protest for your own cause, you might be hearing what people think is wrong with your cause. And that's just as important, because you need to win that person on the side of the street. There is a desire to find someone on the side of the street and say, no, this protest cause is just, is right, and you must fall in line. That's not going to help you. That's just going to cause, as what's happened to the BLM movement, just look like a bunch of riotous, looting, arsonist thugs. And that thing just got completely derailed. Rather than judicial reform and people being stopped and detained for no reason, or being jailed without charge, violence. For many people, that sensible centre just terrified them. Going to wind it up on that one. If you've got some questions for me, please. That's also, I started this stream because there were a couple of questions that people had for me, and I wanted to answer the why do I do what I do in kind of this slightly longer form, but still live way to do it. One thing I'll say is that I find, if you've seen my YouTube channel, it's quite hard for me to produce the long form, high production value recaps. Like the Freedom Day protests last year, this was really time consuming for me to try and illustrate what was happening as I talked about what I thought was a heavy-handed police crackdown, because the people who were there were by and large picnickers in a park. This took over 20 hours for me to try and go through and really illustrate, but doing a live is another reason of why I do what I do, trying to illustrate a larger picture like this. Yeah. I don't know whether it's going to happen on the 21st, but I got some intel and I'll be there. Maybe it's just me and I'll talk to you for 5 minutes before I head off again, or maybe it's something bigger. I don't know. The protest police ran on their own. That's true, Gavin. That's it. That I very much agree with that. That this most recent weekend was the police protesting themselves. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but look, the police were protesting their own lack of turnout at the previous week. Look, it's the police did not have enough boots on the ground at the week before, and you'll think that more boots on the ground mean a more brutal response. Actually, quite the opposite. Because some of their units got separated, that led to a more violent police response. When a couple of units get separated and they get harassed and they got punched, as a couple of them did, that invites the entire hierarchy to then, well, put the boots on. And if you're protester, even if you don't support that cause, you probably don't want to see protesters turn into a mob in the streets. Because I'm pro-protest. I love protest. What would I do if I didn't have protests? But I'm anti-mob. I don't like getting beaten up out there. Why I do what I do is I want to be able to go and talk to protesters to understand what they're doing. Because a year ago through BLM, I was out of touch. I didn't understand what their cause was. I was seeing wild, crazy footage on TV that didn't fit when I was speaking with people in Sydney. And I streamed for hours out there that what they were appealing for, which was judicial reform, which was not being arrested and not being charged. You have to be swiftly charged, and I completely agree with that. Do you see them shutting down the train stations and having checkpoints to prevent people from gathering together? Absolutely. The last protest was a template, and that's one of the, from Police Command's point of view, is they now have a run sheet of what to do. There would have been a meeting on Monday trying to recap what worked and what didn't. And through the rest of the weeks, they'll be continuing to document who needs to be called, what their name is, with their phone number, at what time, for what process. A complete run sheet from top to bottom, T-minus 24 hours before the protest begins, all the way through who you need to do. Who at Uber do you need to contact in corporate relations to make sure that the taxis are shut down? Who in Transport Management Command is going to be responsible for making sure that trains do not stop at Town Hall and just go straight through? So on and so forth. If you want the, shall we say, the top-end response, as we saw at that last weekend of shut down the city, no one is coming in or out, you got a run sheet, you got a template for it, because it worked beautifully, if that's what you want to do. I was in an Uber the other day, and the driver said that he will go to the next protest as he had enough. He has never protested before. Yeah, it's a lot. While there were thugs that turned out at the Freedom Riot, a lot of them were just unemployed Western Sydney labourers, honestly. And some of them were thugs, but some of them were just, I got no job, need job. This was not a complex, do I care about the mRNA content of the bisphenol sulfate complex medical growth. Me want job, me no got job, me mad. And simple people's opinions matter. A lot of the time we're trying to search for the most impoverished people for race or whatever it is like that. Sometimes people are really simple, and their opinions really matter. And we so often want to jump to simple people and say, oh, simple person bad, be more smart. They're just a simple person, and that's okay. Not everyone can get a PhD, and we somehow can't accept this, that simple guy going to do simple thing. And he deserves just as much respect. He deserves just as much honor. But instead we'll throw him away because he's simple. Come on, Chris. These type of protests don't happen much. Some of them had vile behaviours. 100% they did. 100%. I've been to more than one with vile behaviours, believe me. Believe me. The cause is not limited. Violence is not limited to any one cause. We want to try and jump towards saying that there is all BLM or trans or Trump rallies are really violent or Freedom Riot is really violent or what have you. No, not at all. There is no monopoly on violence for a particular cause. What the protesters for that cause do to police their own protest matters. This protest here, this protest here, they did not police their own protesters. They consulted with them, encouraged them. Honestly, if we look at the video, ordered them to. And when it was done, called me a fascist for filming their protest. If you're at a protest and you see someone bricking up, grabbing a large heavy brick or bringing objects with them to throw at someone, bringing beer and alcohol and chugging down and getting ready to punch on, and you don't speak with some of the other protesters around you to try and calm that down, from our point of view at the other end of the camera, we just see you as one of them. So if you're standing next to this other protester and you haven't done anything to stop them. We don't see that. If you're not going to help police them, the police don't know mobsters from protesters. They don't know, and nor does the lens of a camera. All, from most people in the media, are trying to do is get the most dramatic shot that they can in order to demonstrate it. Let's have a look at some... Thank you for the comments, by the way. It's having this dialogue with you, I hope, is helping you and is helping me understand a rapidly changing social world. We don't have large social gatherings for us to hang out and try and understand what's happening between each other, so we've got to try and do our best ourselves. Thank you for your objective view of the police. It helps me to see what it's like for them too. Thanks, Gavin. They have families. They are human. They are not robots. They've been scarred. They've put their trust in different people who've broken the law, criminals, and they've been burnt by them. They've seen people around them get hurt by people that they thought couldn't hurt them. Are they dead inside? No. But they're a little bit more faded than you and I, because they see some of the worst in society. If we're going to go through life and say that everyone deserves empathy, don't police too? This doesn't mean that we do the 1 and the 0 and say that all cops are bastards or all cops are angels, the thin blue line or what have you. We have to respect that some people see the world in simple ways, but some of us are looking for something more complex. And hopefully that's why you're joining me on a stream, to try and work out, what is it? Smoke and Joe, I've interviewed him a few times at different protests. Thanks for the comment, Dave. I expected him to be crazier, just simply because of his passion, but if you get a quiet moment with him away from the crowd, if you get him in the middle of the crowd, he's off the charts. But if you get him away from the crowd, he's quite a calm, reasoned, and remarkably smart gentleman. Despite initial first impressions, he has a nuanced view on things. He's also quite passionate about the causes that he is. As with most people, if you're not hitting me on the head or insulting me, always love to speak with you more. Wish I had a chance to speak with Paddy Gibson, but he just shouts at me. So does David Brophy. Oh well. Infiltrators always. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's... If you're in a protest, or just protesters in general, protesters must police their own. Police don't know who is with and not with. At the Freedom Riot, they didn't know who was organising it, because the organisers had pretty much stepped back from it. All that was left to take charge was Joel Jamal. They didn't know what was going on, and that was one of the worst situations for the police, because the police number one role is order. And if they don't have order, pull the gloves on. Let's get some back. If people don't stand up for what they believe in, how are we ever going to make this a better world? Yeah, it's true. How you stand up for it then matters. From Mahatma Gandhi and Extinction Rebellion to the protection of, the animal rights activists who spill blood on the ground of KFC, to the Iraq War protests. How you use the platform of the streets to amplify your message matters. Because in just a few moments you can go from something completely peaceful to something that's just mostly peaceful. Love the new age music. Good. It's Mr. Scott Buckley. He's lovely. Hopefully it's not too loud. I'm checking some of the levels. I haven't really done a mix live stream with it, but if you're loving it, then that's great. Cops are mostly awesome. Yeah, it's true. Mostly. Some officers join the police just to exert violence at the right opportunity. That doesn't make it wrong. That's honestly your job. But more than once I've seen a public order and riot officer on top of a detainee, speaking sweet nothings into his ear, saying about how, oh, we've got you now. It doesn't make what he's doing wrong, but it certainly does stir the heart a little bit, because if you're ever in that situation, it should chill you when you're stacked on 5 deep and you've got an officer saying that he's got you where you want him. on the other side, if you have officers joining public order and riot not ready to exert overwhelming amounts of force and violence to regain order of the streets, someone else will. Because a lot of the infiltrators, the troublemakers, whatever you want to call it, who came up for that freedom riot were there to do the exact same thing. Do I have media accreditation? That's what I was just going through. Why I opened this up. Because I was just thinking about the responsibilities of journalists. And that's where I was talking about the respect for truth and for the right of the public to truth is the first duty of the journalist. That's what it says. Declaration of Principles by the Conduct of Journalists. And earlier on the stream I was talking about how some of the coverage out of Fairfax by activist journalists, it doesn't fit that. It doesn't fit that. At some point, the MEAA and the International Federation of Journalists, or the local MEAA, will call me into question because broadly, like most unions, they do tilt towards the social left, social progressive, whatever you want to call it. My kind of reporting doesn't fit the box of what it is, and I'll need to face that when it comes, and I'll address it. But yeah, there are psychopaths everywhere. Cops aren't immune, 100%. 100%. Serve and protect the people. That's what police are supposed to do. Kind of. Really, they're there to prevent crime and disorder, number one. Because the only alternative is military force. And the military are not well equipped to dealing with disorder in the streets. My grandfather fled Hong Kong before the Japanese took over in Christmas 42. Sorry, my mistake, Christmas 41. And that policing the streets there, well, Hong Kong began in a city of 1.5 million people. By the end of it, it was only 500,000. They didn't die, but people did not want to be a city ruled by a military police. The stories coming out of that weren't great. So the first job of police is to avoid having to resort to military force. Great. Second job, to police to public approval. So serve and protect is more of an LA slogan that may have worked in the 1980s, but policing's a long way from that. The cities we live in are so much more dense. Sydney is 5.5 million people. Melbourne, about the same. So, but under these issues, it is no time to protest. Save your voices for some time which can be relevant. You catch more bees with honey, and the public appear to hate protest as they don't understand what's behind the protests. Great point. There is a large part of our society that has no appetite for protests right now. And this protest movement's job, or I would suggest, other than to just do protests, is to try and win them over. On the other side, most of the supporters of what, and this is not just freedom, vaccine hesitancy, BLM, Trump, it doesn't matter the issue. Any issue, there's not a lot of demand for public protests right now. How do you balance that exercising of rights with just plain good marketing? Yeah, that's hard. And I don't have the answer for that one. Global media sure hasn't been following that chart. No, they're not particularly good. 31st of August, yeah, I've heard that one as well. But 21st is the one that I think is coming up first. George saying, thanks for all that you do. The messages matter. Little comments and especially DMs do reach me. It's the only way that a lot of us independent journalists get paid is by DMs saying, hey, Chris, thank you for doing what you do. And at some point I might do a little stream and talk about some of the DMs that I do get about that. Mark, you got the real news, live and unedited. Keep doing what you're doing. Thank you, mate. It was that editing that just sent me off the rails, that I needed to go and find out what was happening myself and take a few people along for a ride with it, because living in a world where you can't understand why people are doing what they're doing because it's being edited into oblivion, it's derangement. It's insanity. I know since I've started doing this, I understand why people are protesting and why the social movements that are happening much better than I did before. And while it doesn't make me any money, I understand the world around me much better. And that's a special comfort. Thank you for coming on the journey with me, Ma. I am not a protester, but I am seriously questioning why my way of life is being dictated when I have no fear of COVID. Have you been vaccinated yet? I want you to be vaccinated so that I can be safe from you. Okay, well, I'll take the vaccine. Yeah, we end up with this loop. Where does your liberty end and mine begin? Where does my liberty end and yours begin? This has been debated by scholars and commentators far cleverer than I. But you go on to say, there is no alternative for people to vent their disagreement at the moment besides in numbers, and it is understandable. Yeah, you're right. It is understandable. And just as much as many of these protest movements really need to listen that there is not the demand for any protest at all, no matter the movement, those who do not attend the protests are not listening to those who do. We as a society are not listening to the people. And these protests aren't just in Sydney, Melbourne, and not just in Australia, the US, UK, are not listening to the people who are screaming, saying, I have no job. I have no work. What have you done to me? This wasn't my fault. And I agree with, here we go. Hold on to your hat. I agree with Mark Latham. Oh, there it was. That it's the laptop set that like these lockdowns. Yeah, it's true. I work at home. In fact, personally for me, these lockdowns have been wonderful. It's quiet. No one's around. I don't get disturbed. Get to stay home. Whenever I do need to go somewhere to the shops, the roads are always clear. It's been no skin off my nose, my work whatsoever. So personally, they've been great. For anyone's civil liberties, wow, isn't that appalling? It is understandable that people are angry. You're right, Deborah. But how do we balance people's fear of other people for people's desire to be free? I don't know. It's a hard one. And that's what we're trying. You don't balance it out. Inevitably, you try and win over other people's opinions. That's why people protest. I don't support protests, but I get why people are. Yep, I don't attend them or recommend them. I have friends whose businesses are being shut down who are considering class action. Yep, also challenging vaccine passports. Oh, vaccine passports, that's a good one. Alistair, I love your streams. I love your commentary. I would like to know what your background is. That's good. If you're okay to share it. At the beginning of this stream, I took a bit of a background as to where my journalistic career began and why I started doing it. So come back to that. I'm not going to, but go back to the beginning of that. I'd take us on a journey. In terms of my background as a person, grew up in Sydney, no degree, and left school early. So I left school when I was just 14. I've lived on every continent. Got to live in Johannesburg, Dubai, lived in London, lived in South Florida, Portland as well. So yeah, lived on every continent that you can and experienced a lot of different cultures. Studied religions as well. Learnt some Spanish. Arabic was too much to learn. My background would probably be not just a traveller, as it were, but IT and working in IT, finance and technology, but also someone who's ultimately curious and wants to understand things. Hopefully someone like you. You seem like the most central, unbiased person I have listened to. Thank you, but I'm very biased. I have all kinds of biases, and I think that might be why I come across as particularly unbiased, because I communicate that to people when I say that I like someone, what my agendas are, what I'm there to do. Robert Avadia, one of the journalists at last week's protest, I wonder if I can share this with you while I'm here, was at the protest, and he was wandering around remarkably untouched. And I'm going to see if I can bring up where he had an interview with me, and said that he couldn't comment on what he was doing. He couldn't, and because he needed to stay completely unbiased. But not a few minutes later, he was harassed by some protesters who took his phone. And I'm just seeing if I can find the moment where it happens so I can share that with you, because what he did in the middle of that was he challenged one of the people who walked up to him and said, are you what are you doing? This is a journalist. I'm just going to see if I can. Pardon me while it's an important moment. I'll keep scrubbing through it while I continue commenting on some of these other ones. But I probably, you know what, on Robert Abadia, the 7 News anchor, I'm going to do a separate video sometime. I'll get set up with it, with everything that I need at the right timestamps rather than scrubbing through videos and looking for it. But for a journalist to walk up to a protester away from police lines, he was wandering around with his phone, down his phone like this in the middle of police lines, 2 minutes after he spoke with me. And he then got up to the guy's face, and the protest is very angry. He's like, tell the truth, you know, whatever. And then he goes, so what are you going to do about it? This is Robert Abadia, 7 News anchor. What are you going to do about it? You going to come at me? You going to have a go? 3 minutes beforehand, this 7 News anchor had been coming up to me saying, oh, you know, I can't really comment on what happens here. I've got to make sure as a journalist I'm completely unbiased. Egging on a protester to have a punch on in the middle of Victoria Park. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. When it comes to violence, you might see some different moments where some people say this like, oh, why didn't you defend yourself out there? Because I'm not a monkey. I'm not a chimpanzee. I'm not out there for a fist fight, a knuckle-dragging fist fight in the middle of a field. I'm there to listen. This is not the scene where I'm going to be able to prove my strength in the middle of the jungle. Oh, yes, look at me. I'm the most strong. I'm the most capable of defending myself. No! This is the time for that not to occur, because their violence becomes the story. If you have a group of people so willing to punch a man being like, hey, how's your day been? When that banal a question invites violence, that's all the story you need. Kelly, a community is made up of individuals. When an individual's right is under attack, the whole community is being attacked. Yes, that's the in-group bias that we have there. Oh, look at that. I can even click that. I don't know what I'm doing. That's great. They did pinch Robert Abadi's phone. That's true. All right. I'm going to do just a couple more comments and then I'll wind it up at 10 o'clock. Here's... It's true people don't have disorderly bosses at home. They get paid to sit at home and can watch over their husband. I hear so many say, I wish I was in lockdown again. Yeah, that's true. I think a lot of people do. And one of the movements in the US that has taken hold in Florida and many other states is not a COVID doesn't exist, is not a vaccines a poison, is not a hesitancy at all. It's a life must continue on. And this is one of the most centered views that I've started to find, which is not we all must live in our homes until there's 0 cases. You know, say that's a left equality, social equality view, and with it all equal. Or the right-hand view, which is everyone needs to be responsible for themselves and nothing, and no one needs to wear a mask at any time and take a vaccine. In the middle is life must continue. What is the best way for us to maximize life? And one of the comments I'm going to wind down on is I'm noticing, here we go, some opinion, some commentary, some personal commentaries. So much of all of this debate is so focused around death that we've lost the importance of life and new life within it. We are no longer debating how much life we can gain from the next year, but how much death we can avoid. And that must be a balance between the two. Certainly a lot of the people I speak to feel the same. How we're going to get there is different for everyone. opinions must be shifted. Maybe it is that more lockdowns are going towards keep us with more life being extracted. Whatever this debate of public opinion must be navigated, and any protest movement, even a pro-lockdown protest movement, must also try and shift that public debate with it, because the only alternative to public debate and discourse is violence. And that's exactly why I started doing a lot of this, because I saw a lot of violence and didn't understand why. That is an hour of live commentary, which is a lot for me. I've never done this kind of format before, but I knew without a protest that I know of that's big this weekend, I wanted to reach out to you and cover a couple of comments. I really enjoyed it. I've enjoyed this kind of debate and commentary. Please drop me DMs if you'd like to discuss a little more. I'll probably do another one of these next week. The next protest that I have on my books is on the 21st, so I'll do another one of these. Thank you for watching, and thank you for sharing this as well. One of the biggest values out of this is not just in the sharing and the view counts, but what those view counts lead to for me is the most amazing, wonderful, interesting people reach out to me. And that is the number one resource I get out of all of this, to have those relationships. So thank you. I'll see you next stream. Drop me a DM. Be well, stay safe. Get some sunlight, talk to some friends, build some relationships, and keep living some life. Keep understanding the world. All right. No, everyone. Bye-bye.